Judge Leonard Hayes entered the Los Angeles County Courthouse expecting a routine case involving a reckless teenager. The defendant, 19-year-old Malik Carter, stood beside the defense table, his posture calm, hands in his pockets, and chin lifted just enough to show he wasn't afraid. From the judge's perspective, this was a simple open and shut case: a stolen car, a police chase, and an arrest. To Hayes, Malik wasn't a young man with a story, he was another name on the docket. Another defendant likely heading for a guilty plea. The atmosphere in the courtroom reflected this assumption. Spectators filled the gallery, whispering and chuckling, as if the outcome was already certain. The bailiff smirked, the stenographer glanced sideways, and even the prosecutor, David Thornton, carried himself like he had already won. Hayes's demeanor showed no urgency. He leaned back in his chair, drumming his fingers on the polished wood and glancing at the clock. He even joked about finishing the case quickly to make his 2 p.m. golf game, prompting laughter from the room. This wasn't just about the charges, there was an unspoken judgment about who Malik was. Yet the judge's smirk faded as Malik began speaking for himself. What started as an assumed slam-dunk prosecution began to unravel. Hayes, who had initially seen Malik as another troubled teen, was forced to confront a startling reality. The young man standing before him wasn't clueless. He was articulate, composed, and more prepared than anyone expected. The assumptions that had thickened the courtroom, biases about age, race, and guilt, started to dissipate. By the end of the hearing, the courtroom, once filled with condescending chuckles, had fallen silent, replaced by reflection and disbelief. Hayes' glance toward Malik shifted from amusement to recognition. This was no ordinary defendant. Malik Carter was no ordinary 19-year-old. While most kids his age spent their time on video games or sports, Malik immersed himself in the world of law. His mother, Angela Carter, had worked as a paralegal for over 2 decades, and her stories about courtrooms, legal tactics, and the justice system fascinated him from a young age. He listened carefully as she spoke of how some prosecutors cut corners, how certain judges played favorites, and how defense attorneys sometimes failed to fight for their clients. Those stories didn't just entertain him, they shaped him. By the time Malik was 14, he could break down a court case more thoroughly than many law students. Mock trials weren't just classroom exercises for him, they were personal challenges, mental sparring matches he played in his head daily. His preparation wasn't for fame or recognition, it was born out of a desire to understand a system that so often overlooked people like him. He knew the stakes, understood the biases, and realized how easily someone could be swallowed by a justice system that prioritized quick convictions over truth. Standing in that courtroom wasn't how he envisioned applying his knowledge, but when the moment came, he was ready. Malik's years of studying case law and courtroom procedures gave him the confidence to represent himself, a decision that shocked everyone, including Judge Hayes. While the prosecutor relied on rehearsed arguments, Malik identified cracks in the case with surgical precision. His calm demeanor wasn't arrogance, it was the product of countless hours spent learning, observing, and preparing for a world that didn't expect someone like him to fight back. For Malik, this wasn't just about proving his innocence, it was about challenging a system he had studied his whole life. Prosecutor David Thornton entered the courtroom with the confidence of someone who believed he had already secured a conviction. His suit was impeccable, his tie perfectly knotted, and his voice carried the practiced ease of a man who had delivered the same speech 100 times before. Presenting the state's case, he detailed how Malik Carter was allegedly caught in a stolen 2022 Audi A6, pursued through downtown Los Angeles, and arrested after attempting to flee. The evidence seemed damning: a stolen vehicle, fingerprints on the steering wheel, and an officer's testimony placing Malik behind the wheel. To Thornton and much of the courtroom, the case appeared straightforward. Spectators murmured in agreement, and Judge Hayes nodded along, treating the proceedings as little more than a formality. Thornton's argument was clear-cut: what kind of victim runs from the police? His words resonated with many in the gallery, reinforcing assumptions that had been made the moment Malik walked into the room. Yet, beneath the prosecutor's calm exterior lay an unspoken arrogance, a belief that the defense would crumble under the weight of the evidence. But everything shifted when Malik, rather than relying on his appointed attorney, chose to represent himself. Thornton's smirk faltered. What began as an open and shut case quickly unraveled as Malik exposed inconsistencies in the prosecution's claims. He questioned the reliability of Officer Marcus Delgado's testimony, pointing out that the officer wasn't even on duty at the time of the alleged sighting. Thornton, caught off guard, hesitated just long enough for the courtroom to notice. The turning point came when Malik requested GPS logs to verify the officer's location, an unexpected move that placed Thornton on the defensive. His once polished demeanor began to crack as he scrambled to maintain control. Further damaging the prosecution's case, Malik highlighted that no forensic expert had been subpoenaed to validate the fingerprint evidence, raising questions about the integrity of the investigation. The final blow came when Malik presented a statement from the vehicle's owner, Samuel Preston, who described the thief as a white teenager, a detail conveniently omitted from the prosecution's files. Thornton's earlier confidence dissolved into frustration. His objections grew weaker, his papers shuffled with increasing urgency, and his attempts to refocus the jury on the original charges fell flat. For the first time, it was clear that the case wasn't as solid as Thornton had claimed. The prosecutor's struggle to regain footing underscored a harsh truth. The state's case had relied on assumptions and incomplete evidence rather than irrefutable facts. In that courtroom, the balance of power had shifted, and Thornton, once so certain of victory, found himself outmaneuvered by the very defendant he sought to convict. When Malik Carter stood up in court and declared he would represent himself, the entire courtroom fell into a stunned silence. Judge Leonard Hayes arched an eyebrow, amusement flickering in his eyes, and the prosecutor, David Thornton, let out a chuckle, confident that this decision would only make his job easier. Yet, as Malik stepped forward and began speaking, that confidence in the room began to erode. His voice was calm and measured, his words chosen with the precision of someone who knew exactly how courtrooms worked. Malik didn't rush. He let the silence linger just long enough to make the spectators and jury uneasy before dismantling the prosecution's case piece by piece. His first move was to challenge the key testimony from Officer Marcus Delgado, the officer who claimed to have witnessed Malik in the stolen vehicle. Malik calmly requested GPS logs to verify Delgado's location at the time of the alleged sighting, pointing out that the officer wasn't even on duty when the chase began. The courtroom's murmurs grew louder, and Thornton's previously unshakable confidence wavered. But Malik wasn't done. He turned to the fingerprint evidence, the supposed smoking gun of the prosecution, and explained to the jury how fingerprints alone did not prove guilt. If you try on a jacket at a store and someone steals it later, does that make you a thief? He asked, causing several jurors to exchange thoughtful glances. What truly shifted the courtroom's energy was when Malik revealed the overlooked statement from Samuel Preston, the owner of the stolen Audi. Preston's original report stated he had seen the person who stole his car, describing the thief as white, directly contradicting the state's assertion that Malik had been caught red-handed. Thornton scrambled to object, but the damage was done. The courtroom, once filled with smug chuckles and dismissive glances, now buzzed with disbelief and reflection. Even Judge Hayes, who had entered the courtroom that morning believing this would be an easy conviction, sat back in his chair, rubbing his temples, recognizing how profoundly he had underestimated the young man before him. Malik's defense was not just about legal strategy, it was a carefully constructed dismantling of assumptions, biases, and lazy shortcuts taken by the prosecution. By the time he finished, the power dynamic in the room had completely reversed. The defendant was no longer on the defensive, he was in control. The courtroom, which once looked at him as just another troubled kid, now saw him as someone far more formidable, a young man determined to make the justice system see the truth. As the courtroom fell into stunned silence, Judge Leonard Hayes leaned back in his chair, visibly shaken by the unraveling of what he had assumed was an open and shut case. The gallery, once filled with smirks and muffled laughter, now buzzed with whispers of disbelief. Malik Carter, the 19-year-old defendant who had just dismantled the prosecution's case, stood at the center of it all, calm, composed, and resolute. When Hayes finally spoke, his voice lacked the earlier arrogance. "Case dismissed," he declared, but the weight of those words hung in the air far longer than the echo of his gavel. This wasn't just another court proceeding, it was a reckoning. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, cameras flashing and microphones thrust forward with urgent questions. "Malik, how did you outsmart a seasoned prosecutor? Did you expect the judge to dismiss the case? What's next for you?" Malik, unfazed by the chaos, pulled his hoodie over his head, offering no answers. For him, this wasn't about media attention or proving his intelligence, it was about something far deeper, exposing the cracks in a justice system that often prioritized quick convictions over the truth. His mother, Angela Carter, waited at the bottom of the steps, arms crossed, relief mixed with lingering fear on her face. "Boy, you scared me half to death," she said, pulling him into a tight embrace. Malik chuckled softly. "Had to take the risk, Ma." Across the street, Judge Hayes stood beside his car, his gaze fixed on Malik. Gone was the smirk, the dismissiveness. In its place was something closer to reflection, perhaps even regret. He hadn't expected to be challenged, let alone outmaneuvered by a teenager. Yet, beyond his personal embarrassment, another realization settled in. If a young man like Malik could expose these flaws, how many others had been swept under the rug? How many innocent people had been convicted because no one had the knowledge or courage to fight back? Malik's victory wasn't just a personal triumph, it was a mirror held up to a flawed system, a reminder that justice should be about truth, not expediency. As he walked away from the courthouse, he knew this wasn't the end of his journey. Today he had stood as a defendant, but one day he would return, this time as an attorney, determined to fight for those whose voices the system often ignored. His story wasn't just about one case, it was a call for change. Malik Carter's courtroom victory was more than just the dismissal of a single case. It was a profound reminder of the systemic issues embedded in the justice system. As the gavel fell and Judge Leonard Hayes uttered the words "case dismissed," the weight of the moment rippled through the packed courtroom. Reporters scrambled to capture reactions, while spectators sat in stunned silence, reflecting on what had just unfolded. For many, it was the first time they had seen the system confront its own flaws so directly, but for Malik, this was never about just proving his innocence. It was about exposing how easily assumptions and bias could derail justice. Outside the courthouse, a crowd of journalists pressed forward, their cameras flashing, their voices blending into a chorus of questions. Malik, however, remained calm, pulling his hoodie over his head and walking past them. He wasn't interested in the spotlight or the headlines. His focus was on the bigger picture, the countless individuals who never got the chance to defend themselves against wrongful accusations. His mother, Angela Carter, waited at the bottom of the steps, her face a mixture of relief and lingering fear. Wrapping him in a hug, she whispered, "You scared me half to death." Malik smiled softly. "Had to take the chance, ma." Across the street, Judge Hayes watched with a thoughtful expression, the arrogance from earlier replaced with quiet contemplation. He had come into the courtroom believing Malik was just another troubled teen, but now he couldn't ignore the truth the young man had laid bare. The system wasn't just flawed, it was dangerous when left unchecked. Malik's courage forced everyone to reflect on how many people had been wrongfully judged based on appearances, shortcuts, and unchecked bias. Malik's story serves as a powerful lesson. Justice is about truth, not assumptions, and while he walked out of court a free man, his journey was just beginning. As the courtroom's tension dissolved into stunned silence, Judge Leonard Hayes's voice cut through the air with finality. "Case dismissed." The gavel's echo lingered, but its impact stretched far beyond the wooden bench. For the first time that day, the spectators, once amused and dismissive, sat speechless. Prosecutor David Thornton, who had entered the courtroom with unwavering confidence, now fumbled with his papers, his earlier certainty shattered. But at the center of it all stood Malik Carter, calm and resolute, the 19-year-old who had turned the entire case on its head. Outside, the courthouse steps buzzed with activity. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward with rapid-fire questions. "Malik, did you expect this outcome? How does it feel to outmaneuver the prosecution? What's next for you?" Malik pulled his hoodie over his head, ignoring the commotion. This wasn't about fame or proving he was smarter than seasoned lawyers, it was about something deeper. His fight wasn't just for himself, it was for every person who had been wrongfully accused, every name lost in a system that too often valued quick resolutions over truth. At the bottom of the courthouse steps stood his mother, Angela Carter. Her arms were crossed, her face torn between relief and lingering fear. When Malik reached her, she shook her head. "Boy, you scared me half to death," she whispered, pulling him into a tight embrace. Malik smiled faintly. "Had to take the chance, ma." Her hug tightened, her silent pride speaking louder than words ever could. Across the street, Judge Hayes lingered by his car, watching the scene unfold. The arrogance that had marked him at the beginning of the trial was gone, replaced by something closer to reflection, maybe even regret. He had walked into that courtroom expecting a routine conviction, just another name on the docket. Instead, he had been forced to confront the uncomfortable truth. The justice system he upheld was not infallible. Malik's case was a wake-up call, one that echoed beyond the courtroom walls. Malik's victory wasn't just a personal triumph, it was a mirror held up to the entire justice system. How many others had been judged on assumptions? How many convictions were built on shaky evidence and unchecked bias? As Malik walked away, one thing was clear: this was just the beginning. He had stood in that courtroom as a defendant, but the next time he returned, it wouldn't be from the defense table. It would be as an advocate for those who couldn't fight for themselves. His story wasn't just about one case, it was a call for change, a reminder that justice isn't automatic. It's something that must be demanded, fought for, and most importantly, protected for everyone. Malik Carter's courtroom battle was more than a fight for his own freedom. It was a powerful reflection of the flaws embedded in the justice system. As Judge Leonard Hayes uttered the words "case dismissed," a heavy silence settled over the room, replacing the earlier laughter and dismissiveness with disbelief and reflection. The prosecutor's once confident arguments had crumbled under Malik's precise questioning and calm dismantling of the evidence. But beyond the legal victory, the deeper issue remained. How many people, without Malik's knowledge and composure, had been wrongfully convicted because of similar assumptions and oversights? Outside the courthouse, the air buzzed with media frenzy. Reporters crowded the steps, shouting questions and flashing cameras, hoping to capture the young man who had just turned the justice system on its head. Malik, however, wasn't interested in the spotlight. Pulling his hoodie over his head, he walked past the microphones and cameras, focused on something more important than public attention. His mother, Angela Carter, waited at the bottom of the steps, her face etched with relief and lingering worry. "You scared me half to death," she said, pulling him into a hug. Malik managed a small smile. "Had to do it, Ma," he replied softly. Across the street, Judge Hayes watched silently. His earlier arrogance had given way to introspection. He had entered the courtroom expecting another routine conviction, but left questioning how many other cases had slipped by unquestioned. Malik's defense had exposed more than just prosecutorial missteps. It revealed a system willing to prioritize efficiency over fairness. Malik's story is a wake-up call, a reminder that justice isn't automatic. It requires vigilance, courage, and a willingness to challenge assumptions. His fight wasn't just for himself, it was for everyone overlooked by a system too quick to judge. And as he walked away from the courthouse, one thing was clear. This was only the beginning of his journey for change. Malik Carter's story offers powerful life lessons that resonate deeply, especially with older audiences who value justice, integrity, and wisdom. One of the most important messages is to never judge a book by its cover. Many in the courtroom, including the judge and prosecutor, assumed Malik was guilty based on appearances and preconceived notions rather than facts. This reminds us all to approach situations and people with fairness and an open mind. Another vital lesson is the importance of knowledge and preparation. Malik's calm, informed defense shows that being educated and well prepared can help us face life's unexpected challenges, regardless of our age or background. Perhaps the most profound takeaway is the reminder that standing up for what's right isn't always easy, but it's necessary. Even when the odds seem stacked against us, having the courage to speak the truth can bring about real change. For older generations who have witnessed life's many ups and downs, this story reinforces that integrity and persistence remain valuable at any stage of life. It encourages us to reflect on our own biases, to listen more carefully, and to advocate for fairness, not just for ourselves but for future generations who will inherit the world we help shape today.